Our guest speaker today faces an incredibly busy work week. And it is a week in which many of us are counting on him to win it one more time before the Supreme Court. I suppose in some ways Doug Christie needs no introduction. Nobody needs to be told that he's a lawyer, where he got his education, or anything like that. But I would like to remind you of just how impressive and how important a person he is. And we all know lawyers, perhaps not in a very favorable way. And Doug, I'm sure, could become very, very wealthy simply by doing real estate law. You know, checking out the documents to make sure you actually own the house that you were trying to sell, and so on, and sending his law clerk around to do most of the legwork for him, and sending you a big bill at the end of it, and being very uncontroversial. Doug has chosen a very difficult way to practice his profession, but he has done something that very, very few lawyers will ever do, and that is to take a case to the Supreme Court. But more than that, he's taken cases to the Supreme Court and he has won them. And they are extraordinarily important cases. He is the man who single-handedly destroyed one of the major building blocks against freedom of speech in Canada, and that was the false news law, which only cost Ernst & Young $1 million to get dismantled. He is the man who single-handedly destroyed the war criminals legislation. If it had not been for Doug Christie's work at the FINA trial, at the appeal, and before the Supreme Court, Canada's notoriously discriminatory war crimes legislation would be on the books today. And believe me, there would be many more East Europeans in jail for things they did or didn't do 50 years ago. In fact, now the authorities have descended to Mickey Mouse games under the Immigration Act to try to get rid of East Europeans who they have told German-Canadian lobbyists they know are guilty. Alan Rock has told a delegation of German and Ukrainian Canadians, we're proceeding this way because we know they're guilty. Now, before the evidence is in, before any trial is ever held, he knows they're guilty. That's why, because he knows he can't prove it to a jury, they're going to try to get rid of these 70 and 80-year-old East Europeans through the less demanding route of simple deportation procedures. But the work Doug Christie has done has actually destroyed the war crimes law. Now he faces an even maybe not a more daunting task, but still an extraordinarily important hearing. And this is the Malcolm Ross case, and this is what he's going to be telling us about this afternoon. So without any further ado, Doug Christie.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. I'm a very quiet sort of person. I don't have any strong opinions about the referendum. And I'm not going to talk about it today because I don't think it's right for a Western Canadian to come here and say anything to the people of Quebec to try and encourage them one way or another. I just want to be assured that it'll be their decision, and I really don't have strong feelings either way. And naturally, I think it's important, though, that if anybody has any strong feelings, I have a few more of these. You might want to have some later on. I'm willing to give them away as long as you're willing to put them on your vehicle. That's the only stipulation. I say that because it's important to joke about Canada, because it is a joke, Canada. It's a country that is a very foolish country, a country that has lost its purpose and lost any real reason for existence, whether or not the people of Quebec are successful in escaping its clutches or not. It's a country that has abandoned its fundamental values and abandoned the very thing that held it as a unit, a purposeful meaning, and basically by that I mean the Christian faith. It was the foundation of Canada's values, and whether or not you share those values, you today are the beneficiary of those values, and we are abandoning them as we have over time, and the result is it's written somewhere that except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it, and except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waits but in vain. and all the protestations and flag wavings and national anthem singings that you'll hear and have heard in the last couple of days really are all for naught. It hasn't changed one iota of this country's bankrupt nature. It hasn't changed its oppressive laws that have taken away freedom of speech from people in this country. Freedom to tell the truth is in jeopardy, is being destroyed. It hasn't changed any of that. And when they talk about this so-called wonderful country, they don't talk about the laws about abortion. They don't talk about the limitations and restrictions on freedom of speech. They don't talk about taxes. They don't talk about debt. They don't talk about gun control, which is basically an instrument of political oppression of the people to take away their power, either to resist oppressive governments or to defend themselves. They don't talk about bilingualism or any of the other frustrations that day by day have eliminated the very reason why people used to be intelligently proud to be Canadian. Now all they can do is sing the national anthem and wave an anti-Christian symbol, their flag. And the result, ladies and gentlemen, is the logical result of abandonment of your fundamental principles, the dissolution of a dissolute nation. That's unfortunately the time in history when we gather here today. We are few, but I think we know more about the reality of this situation than the vast majority of people standing in the rain waving their flags. And the result, of course, is that having abandoned the God that unites Christians in this part of the world, that God can no longer save their country from the logical effects of their lack of fundamental value. And the result, of course, is that it's a country of special interest groups. And really the reason why Malcolm Ross is persecuted is because one very powerful special interest group doesn't like his religious beliefs. And the Malcolm Ross case is symptomatic of everything that's wrong about Canada. It's a case in which the private expression of religious opinion is being denounced, not actually by a court of law. He's never been prosecuted under the criminal code, because under the criminal code there is a defense for the honest expression of religious opinion. It's a legal defense, and it says you cannot be convicted if you're expressing in good faith your opinion upon a religious subject. You don't have to be a priest, you don't have to be a minister, you can even be an ordinary Christian, you can be a Muslim, you can be a Hindu, you can be a Jew, you can be anything you like and express a religious opinion that might promote hatred, in fact. But that's not a crime in Canada because it's understood that every religious opinion is inherently discriminatory, isn't it? Allah is the God of the Muslims, and Muhammad is his only prophet, or at least the greatest prophet. And of course to a Christian there is but one God, and Jesus Christ is his Son on earth, and there is no salvation outside of Jesus Christ. If you believe that, then you can see why the Christian view of Islam and of Judaism and of all others is that they are false religions, and they cannot be true. And anyone who promotes them is promoting falsehood. And willingly or unwillingly, they are leading souls to damnation if you happen to be a Christian. So, religion is discriminatory. It says my religion is right, and yours, if you disagree, is wrong. Some people say, but we must all agree. We must all agree on everything. But you know something? Islam and Christianity cannot both be right. And Judaism and Christianity cannot both be right. Christianity says that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, that he was and is the only means to salvation. Judaism says that Jesus Christ is the son of a Roman soldier and a hairdresser, born out of wedlock, and that all those who follow him are deluded fools, and that he is a false Messiah. Can both be right. Must be one wrong and the other right, or perhaps both wrong, but they can't both be right. And so therefore, in order to allow any religious freedom, and I say religious freedom not to allow error to succeed, because error won't succeed in a free discussion, but to allow religious freedom to find the truth, you must allow religious freedom to express the truth. And in religious context, the truth can only be told forcefully and with a missionary zeal when it is believed. And if a person believes in a religion, be it Christianity or any other, they must say those other religions are false. Those other people are deluded. Those other people are wrong. You must be free to say this if you are to have any genuine right to freedom of expression on a religious subject. That is in fact discriminatory. Well, ladies and gentlemen, discriminatory is the modern equivalent of the old word heretic. And we have a new category of courts called human rights tribunals, and they are today what the Inquisition was to the time of the Catholic Church in Spain. And I'm not sure, because I don't have all the knowledge about the Catholic Church in Spain or the Inquisition. But I do know that the Human Rights Commissions have no restrictions of rules of evidence. They don't have to prove anything. They just have to prove that they believe, and they, meaning a politically appointed correct person, believes that you have discriminated. That is, to have an opinion that depreciates others on the basis of religion, for instance. It could also be on the basis of sexual orientation. And we now know that it's regarded as improper to express the Christian condemnation of homosexuality. That's discriminatory. Of course, that means that Christians cannot say what it says they should say. And in essence, then, the human rights tribunals are the instrument of the suppression of at least the Christian religion, and maybe all other religions as well. And the real danger is that these are politically appointed bodies. Now, this case involves that very important issue. Can you or can you not tell the truth as you see it and as you believe it? The answer by Mr. Brian Bruce, Inc. is no, you can't, particularly if you're a teacher. But don't think that because you're not a teacher you would be secure, because policemen are also persons of authority, and of course the same argument can be made about them. They're role models, and we can't allow them to express religious opinions on their own time, because someone might perceive, and need not be evidence that they actually are biased, but might perceive that they were biased against some other religion. The same could be said of lawyers. Why, we must all be able to go to a lawyer and know that the lawyer is not going to have a religious view that is going to take a dim view of my religion. If I happen to be Jewish, or I happen to be Islamic, or I happen to be Hindu or Buddhist, they must be totally amoral. That's a good way to put it, isn't it? They must be totally amoral when it comes to religion. They cannot express or have a religious view. So ultimately what this means is that freedom of religion is effectively destroyed by the view that you cannot discriminate upon a religious subject. To be free to have a religious view, and many of us don't. I mean, I'm talking to a room full of people. Some might be Christians, some might not, some might have other religions. You know, that's quite obviously possible in any group of people. But the fact is, we must recognize that real religions do exist, and when they exist, and if you believe in them, if you believe in a religion, you must take the view that the rest of those folks are totally wrong, to put it mildly. And if you really believe that there is only one salvation, and if you really believe that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but through Him, then you have a duty to say so and to condemn false religions. Well, that means that a Christian, at least, could not be a Christian and be a teacher. They could not be anything else as a religion and be a teacher either. Unless, of course, as they did as the Human Rights Tribunal said to Mr. Ross, well, he's entitled to think what he likes, as long as he doesn't say anything about it. That's what freedom of speech means. You're allowed to think, as long as you don't say anything about it. Well, the ultimate end result is the oppressive attitude that was expressed by Brian Bruce. So we took it to a higher court. We took it to the Court of Queen's Bench in New Brunswick. And we said, the order of Brian Bruce is totally contrary to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It says you must take Mr. Ross out of the classroom, and it says you must put him on a leave of absence without pay for 15 months unless you have another job within the school district for him, and you must prevent him. In fact, he must never publish or speak on those subjects again. And they listed the books that he has written, one of which is here today, very interesting book, I hope, and Malcolm has some. That book is basically the explanation of the conflict between Judaism and Christianity. And the thesis, if I'm not mistaken, and I hope Malcolm will correct me if I'm wrong, is that Judeo-Christianity is an oxymoron. It's a false statement. It's an impossible position. So anyway, their position was he could never publish that again. Well, we felt that that was wrong, and as we took it to the New Brunswick Court of Queen's Bench, the lowest superior court in Quebec, we had Justice Korean, and he said that it's wrong to prevent Mr. Ross from expressing his religious opinions. That was contrary to the Charter. But it wasn't wrong to keep him out of the classroom. He thought that was justified under Section 1 of the Charter, which says that you can limit freedoms, all those freedoms we're supposed to have, when they're subject to such reasonable limits as are demonstrably justifiable in a free and democratic society, whatever that means. The judge decides. Justice Korean said, well, it's okay to shut him up. No, sorry, it's not okay to shut him up. It's okay to keep him out of the classroom because we wouldn't want him in a position where he could influence children, even though he never has. And we felt that that was wrong, and through the help of a great many people, many of whom I suppose helped Mr. Ross, as they did last night in Toronto, and as they have all over Canada to try to preserve freedom for those who hold religious views, we felt that people deserve something better. We appealed to the Court of Appeal. And there were three judges, Justice Stratton and Justice Ryan and Angers. Mr. Justice Angers, who was the middle judge of the three. And our position was very simply this. There is not one shred of evidence that Malcolm Ross at any time expressed his personal religious views or his personal religious views expressed elsewhere had ever any effect in the classroom or the school district. There was no evidence that they had ever had any effect whatsoever. There was evidence from two Jewish children, Mr. Lampert and Ms. Addis, the daughter of the complainant, Mr. Addis, that they had been taunted by some people who called his daughter a Nazi. Well, I don't know why they would do that, but nevertheless, they called his daughter a Nazi, and then they called her a Jew, and a few other names that were not nice. And Jew, of course, is not a bad name. It's just that they put it with another name, which was not nice. Now, the suggestion was that this had something to do with Mr. Ross, but never at any time did any of these schoolyard taunts, and that's all they were, at another school, by other children, never taught by Mr. Ross, never meeting Mr. Ross, never connected in any way to Mr. Ross, never even referred to Mr. Ross. There was no evidence that they had ever heard of Mr. Ross. So, the position was quite simply, how can you punish Mr. Ross for what someone else does in another school without any connection whatsoever to him? He has no control, no influence, no knowledge of what's going on somewhere else. And bottom line, and the conclusion was, by the Court of Appeal, it's not demonstrably justifiable to prevent a person from being a teacher when they've never done anything wrong as a teacher. They rely, for instance, on cases where teachers take off their clothes and pose out of school for skin magazines. Shewan, a couple of people from Abbotsford, they decided that their bodies were so beautiful that they wanted to show the world, so they had their pictures taken and sold them to some magazine in the United States. And I don't know whether there was any particular hue and cry, but some student found these pictures and they were disciplined. Well, there's no constitutionally protected right to take your clothes off. You take your clothes off at your peril. If your employer doesn't particularly like that, you might lose your job. But nobody ever said, anywhere, at any time, that the private expression of your sincere religious convictions should ever be subject to discipline, unless your religion is particularly bad. And that brings us full circle, doesn't it? That brings us back to the position that they had to take, and that was that Mr. Ross's religion is bad. And the only time I know of when people have decided that somebody's religion was bad was in a place that I've heard about. The Inquisition used to decide that people had bad religious beliefs. I'm sure there might be other occasions, but I haven't heard of any. And I think it's quite wrong, and so the Court of Appeal agreed. We won at the Court of Appeal the right for Mr. Ross to be taken back into the classroom. And in effect, then, all of the punishment imposed, and they don't like to call it punishment, they like to call it correction. They don't say it's, you know, this is doublespeak. Eh? George Orwell was right. They haven't got the guts to say what they're really doing. In the name of removing discrimination, they discriminate. In the name of tolerance, they're intolerant. This is total Stalinist doublespeak. It's totalitarianism of the worst kind. So we won. And of course, the enemies of freedom, they never sleep, they never rest, and they never let you rest. And the result is they pursued it again. They appealed for leave to the Supreme Court of Canada, and they got it. And here we are, the day after the referendum. we will go before the Supreme Court of Canada. And at that time, there will be 3 appellants, Mr. Addis, the New Brunswick Human Rights Commission, each probably with 2 lawyers. Then there will be the Canadian Jewish Congress, who got the right to intervene at the trial even. And they will be there probably with 2 lawyers, so that makes 6. Then there will be a representative of the Canadian Association of Human Rights Societies, CASHRA, or CASHROOT. I'm not sure which it is. In any event, they will be there. And they will probably have 2 lawyers. And then there'll be the Attorney General of British Columbia, of all people. You know, you wouldn't know that he was that interested in the New Brunswick problem involving a single teacher in New Brunswick who happened to have religious views, but oh yes. I'll tell you why, because I made the point in the British Columbia case that all of a sudden human rights commissions can't run roughshod over the Charter, because Malcolm Ross's case said that every judgment that affects those freedoms has to be subject to the limits of the Charter, and if it isn't, courts will intervene. Oh goodness, you mean we can't just do what we like in a human rights tribunal? Oh, they were very upset. And they're the first people to realize the implications of Malcolm Ross's case. It's not that just because of Malcolm Ross's beliefs, human rights commissions cannot legislate against him. It means that they, the human rights commissions, must make all their judgments subject to the Charter, meaning we all can still have rights in spite of their power. Well, heaven forbid the citizen should have those rights. We're only supposed to have collective rights. You have rights if you're a part of a visible minority, not an individual. See, there's a great conflict in this society between the concept of individual rights, which exists in the Charter, and the concept of collective rights, which is existing as the foundation for human rights laws. You don't have a human right unless you're a member of a visible minority based on race, religion, or ethnic origin, or perhaps sexual orientation. If you're not in those categories, forget it. If you're just an individual, you have no rights, not human rights. So, this is why it's an important case, and it's of great concern to the premier, I suppose, of the province that Stalin couldn't have asked for a better government for, my favorite province, British Columbia. Beautiful country it is, will be soon, I hope. But it has had a short history of a very, very self-righteous socialist government, soon to be go the way of all flesh, because it's been revealed that these very, very careful, moral, and sanctimonious NDPers have been siphoning money out of the pockets of poor little charity contributors for 20 or 30 years. And, you know, all the time they were criticizing Mr. Van der Zam for selling his property with a little cash in a parking lot. They themselves were stealing hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars from people, little people, not a rich Taiwanese millionaire who wouldn't miss $10,000 in the middle of the night, but a whole bunch of little people giving $20 for bingo cards. But they were so righteous, and you know, they've been so righteous for so long. It's really quite, you know, there is a God, and he does watch these people, and what goes around comes around. So I must say that it's with some satisfaction I can say that I doubt very much that the Attorney General of British Columbia will be for a great deal of time opposed to our position. It's probable that their argument will change, but they're there. And in addition to them is B'nai B'rith, of course. We've come to know them and love them as our perpetual adversaries. And we know that along with B'nai B'rith and Kashrut and British Columbia Attorney General, there's somebody else. Ah, yes, those great defenders of civil liberties, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. They're there too. And they also say, they all agree on one thing: Malcolm Ross must not be a teacher. Because you cannot have a discriminatory religious opinion and be a teacher. Except, of course, if you're a Jew, a lesbian, a homosexual, a communist, they could be legitimate opinions. But not if you're a Christian who believes that there is a truth, a way, and one life. Oh, no, that's discriminatory. So you see, it's very selective emphasis of non-discrimination. It's obviously, really, it's a political struggle between two conflicting religious ideologies. And it's a struggle which I happen to share Mr. Ross's view in, that if we were to fail, it's the truth that loses. And there are some people who say that there's only religious liberty for truth. But the problem with that is we don't live in a religious society where truth automatically prevails. We live in a society which is actually hostile, very hostile to the truth. And therefore we have to struggle very hard to assert the right to express and explain, advocate, and to conduct proselytizing for the truth. And if we can't do that, then evil will triumph. So it's on behalf of those principles that we will be contending on Tuesday. And in fact, it'll be very interesting among all those people that I've mentioned. They'll all be on one side of the room and I'll be on the other. Hopefully I'll get Mr. Ross to help me look up the transcripts from time to time. If we don't, I'll be there alone. And they will have 3 hours. They will have probably 10 lawyers in 3 hours. So they'll all have, you know, a little bit of really their first and best punch. And then they'll sit down, and the next guy will get up and give his first and best punch. And then they'll go through the whole 10 of them with their first and best punch for 3 hours. And then I get 2 hours to answer all of them. And that's the way it is. That's called the rules. So, you know, fair play, right? Well, that's the reality, but don't forget that truth has a power, and I pray that you will help by praying and hopefully maybe being there. You know, we have to have faith that somehow or other truth will prevail and justice will be done. It's obvious that were they on sound ground, they wouldn't need 10 people. You know, 10 liars are no stronger than one truth teller. And I'm not saying they are liars, but I just happen to think that they're contending for a position that is not truthful or right.
Is that lawyers or lawyers?
Yes, hard to tell sometimes. But we hope the distinction will be clear. Now, if I could just generalize from that position and that situation and explain how that in microcosm has a great deal to do with what's going on in the whole country, it might be useful to tie this in with my first statement, or my first important statement, which was that except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. First of all, if we're not doing what's right, then we will not have the strength of our convictions, and we will not have the strength of God's assistance in the pursuit of what we're striving for. I believe that we will. I believe that we do. However, Canada as a country that has sort of drifted off into special interest groups has finally come to the ultimate realization that special interest groups have nothing in common. And Quebec, the primordial special interest group, the one to which everyone is supposed to cater, the one that's been threatening separation as long as I've been aware, has come to the crossroads where they can't be bought off anymore, where the pride of Quebecers has come to mean that there's nothing they want from us but their freedom. And I think that's much more admirable, much more respectable than the constant begging and pleading and bribery and corruption that's gone on with Trudeau, with Mulroney, with Clark, with these people that have always said, give more to Quebec so they stay. And you know, appeasement has never worked. It doesn't work now, and it's been demonstrated a failure by what's going to happen tomorrow. I really sincerely pray that the people of Quebec, in the main, Francophones, but certainly even others, will accept the fact that it's better to be even poor, but self-supporting. It's better to have your identity, your language, and your culture and be true to what you are and who you are than to be bribed by all the money in the world and the power that goes with it. We all know how many Quebec prime ministers we've had. We all know how many Quebec cabinet ministers we've had. They've all been bribed. Bribed with power. You play the game. You kowtow to the Canadian system and pretend and threaten the rest of Canada with give us power or else, and we'll make you Minister of Transport, Minister of this, Minister of that. You'll have handouts from the time you're here till the time you die, and it never ends. And the result is a country with a $580 billion debt. And I used to go around Alberta in 1980, and I'd say when we had a $130 billion debt. Actually, it was $90 billion in 1980, and within 2 years it was $130 billion, but never mind. I used to say that Alberta can't afford Confederation. Get out while you still can. They're going to take your home, your farm, your prosperity, because it's always the same story. People didn't understand that. They said, well, we're doing all right. And then there was the National Energy Policy. It was October 31st, 1980. Interesting, isn't it? October 31st, 1980, I had a meeting in Edmonton, and it was the day before, it was October 30th actually, when Mr. Trudeau announced the National Energy Policy, and it was like he lit a match to the whole of Alberta. The people, for the first time, realized, because they didn't have a Liberal west of the Lakehead, and the Liberals didn't need Western support, the people realized they really didn't count. The government was elected in Quebec and Ontario before they counted the votes west of the Lakehead, so everybody knew what the story was as to power, and suddenly they realized that it was real corrupt power, that it would steal from you. That really shook them. It would steal from you. It would take your heritage away, your land, your resources. And for once, Albertans were united, and we became quite a significant political force. Soon to be divided and conquered by the old bugaboo of the right wing, the infiltration, disruption, and power-seeking among those who were already looking for jobs in the new country. Well, as is the right and proper thing, these bad motives failed. And people turned away from separation. They turned away from the right road because it was easier to be a Canadian, easier to get your pension. You know, they used to say, well, if we separate, what about our pensions? Well, nowadays, that's the separatist cry. That's the separatist cry, you see. When they say, what about our pensions, what they mean now is, who's going to pay them? Where are they going to come from? From a $580 billion debt? No, not likely. Not likely. So they've given all this money now. And I was on a talk show in Edmonton about a week ago. About a week ago. And all the people said, it was about this Go Quebec Go thing. We used to think you were crazy in 1980, but now we realize we wasted 15 years. I said, right, 15 years and $130 billion and your Heritage Fund and all the oil that went down to central Canada, down the pipeline to central Canada, got burnt up, taxed up, and wasted. And now you're telling me you're a separatist? Late you come, but still you come. Too late, you realize. I used to say in 1980, there were people who would say time after time, all their lives, well, I think we should give them another chance. I think there will be a change, you know. When the Conservatives take the place of the Liberals, things will be different. And then when the Liberals take the place of the Conservatives, things will be different. And finally I say, like many of them on their deathbed, they'll come to the realization, now I'm a separatist. And they die. Well, I hope they wake up this time, and a few of us are still alive, and still strong enough to tell them the truth. Not that we're as capable of doing anything about it as we used to be, but the chance still exists for us that we could build a prosperous, debt-free nation, true to our culture. We always compromise this, you see. We used to compromise it for the special interest group in Quebec because we had to do away with any symbol that looked like this. Anything that had this on it had to go. We, of course, got rid of the red ensign. We got rid of every Christian symbol. And of course that was then the step to saying we had to get rid of Christmas from our schools. We had to get rid of every cultural heritage we had to placate Quebec and then ultimately placate every third world person who came with different values so that we'd never offend anybody. We're good Canadians, we're tolerant. And the end result was we have nothing. Spiritually we were bankrupt, financially we were bankrupt, and the result was that now we have to start all over again, like bending down with broken fingers to pick up the things we dropped in 1980 and build a new country all over again. And it will be by no means easy. It will be far harder than it would have been in 1980, but people realize now that it's necessary. And it will be done. And I think Quebec will be far more able to protect the Christian heritage of Quebec. After all, they're probably the only province with a Christian symbol in their flag today, when you think about it. They'll be far more able to protect that heritage when they are their own country, proud and strong and free, and unable to be bribed anymore by the government in Ottawa who borrows and steals the money from other people to do it. You see, Canada was a socialist system. That's basically what it's been. It's been against everything that was true about individuals, and it was against the very things that we valued as our heritage. And it used the equalization system to buy off Quebec, and it used the threat of separation to make us to pay willingly to give up our heritage. And we were all the losers. Big countries have failed around the world. They have no means of having any inherent value. And you know, the latest new devolution of power is, and imagine this, from Canada, giving special powers based on race to native people, you know, the native people. They call them native. Well, I was born here. I thought I was a native, but I guess I'm the wrong color. This book, called Our Home or Native Land, is a very valuable expose of what the Canadian government is doing all over the country to give special rights based on race to people who claim to be natives, not because they were born here, because as I say, I was born here, but because their ancestors had a different skin color than mine. That's the only reason they're native and I'm not. And this book is an extremely interesting expose of another aspect of the corruption of Canada. It's an example of the total failure of the federal system. You've really got to get this book, and Paul has it here today. You read that book, and one chapter is all you need to get into, and you're going to be boiling mad. Because they tell you what the direction of this country is a total brick wall for everything we believe in. Our culture is deliberately going to be destroyed. Now you see, we're defending our Christian heritage in a courtroom starting on Tuesday morning. If anyone can help us, we need to highlight some authorities later on today perhaps, or tomorrow night, that we're going to be giving to the court. But let's say, take the worst case scenario, we fail. It's not us who fail. It's Canada that has failed. It is Canada that will have destroyed the essential elements for its vitality. Because without the truth, there is no freedom. And in my view, in the view of many other people, without Christ and Christianity, there is no individual freedom, no individual purpose, and no national purpose either. But if I'm wrong, and we win, well then we have preserved that freedom for ourselves at the last moment when this country has abandoned it in every other way. The courts, of course, cannot legislate belief. They cannot bind the country together by law. If the country has abandoned its essential heritage, it will pay the price, inevitably and unavoidably. But in this book, which I mentioned, the example is given of surrender of our Christian heritage to these tribal cultures. And they're definitely anti-Christian. I mean, that's exactly what they are. And they blame all the problems they've experienced through alcoholism, through child abuse, which in some cases is attributable to some people in the church. But in every instance, the accusation is made the white man is to blame for everything. White culture is to blame for everything. I mean, they want to keep the wheel. They're like that. They want to keep Medicare. They want to keep money. They want to keep taxpayers' money, and I mean millions. There's no stopping that. They also want land, resources, government power to make laws, and they want constitutionally entrenched recognition of their own tribal society, which doesn't have to be democratic. There's no requirement that their societies be democratic, and any future negotiations will be government to government. So the mafia could take over any one of these so-called tribal homelands and could run it entirely undemocratically and could demand that we pay for it. And that's exactly what will happen. Those laws are passed and are being passed without even debate. The reformers try to oppose it, but they can't. Because Canada has disintegrated into the power struggle of special interest groups. And the majority religion of Christianity, which once was the foundation of our country, and I'm not speaking as one who's always been a devout practitioner of Christianity. I wasn't raised in what would be considered a church-going home. I come to the Christian faith by personal experience, but not by anybody's indoctrination, and I don't claim to be the best possible Christian. But I do claim that it is really the essential foundation for the success of any nation, because it is essentially based on individual freedom and individual self-sacrifice. The imitation of Christ is the action of giving to others out of a love of either yourselves in the sense of the extended self, the ideal person of Jesus Christ, or alternatively, because you love something greater than yourself. Self-sacrifice is the essence of the Christian religion. And it's really the essence of all heroic conduct, when you think about it. Greater love hath no man than that he should lay down his life for his friends. What's that but what we write on our cenotaphs? Isn't that what we expect of all good soldiers? Isn't that what we find in all good mothers? They give their lives for their children. They give their life for their family. Isn't that what we expect from all good men? They give their life for their family. Isn't that what we expect from a stable, true society? A society in which people give more than they take. But what is a socialist society? One in which you can sit back and say, feed me, give me, help me. I don't need to help myself. You owe it to me. I don't owe anything to you. Isn't that the socialist system? Isn't that what equalization is all about? Isn't that what Canada is all about? And if that's true, who can be terribly sad with the passing of a self-centered and egotistical society like that? Well, that's why I think we have reason to be optimistic. I'm very grateful for the fact that Tuesday I'll have the chance to try again to preserve these inherently important values. When I say inherent, I was on the plane talking to a lady about this book, and she said, yeah, right, and a little sarcastically she said, the inherent right to self-government, like the inherent right to gamble, and the inherent right to rob and plunder and murder, all a great part of the tribal history of most tribes in Western Canada, at least. You know, is that what we mean by inherent rights? My ancestors probably were just as good at that as some of theirs, maybe a little further back. At least I hope so. I can't be too sure. But nevertheless, our laws, which are meant to apply equally to all, were meant to preserve peace and stability in society, and they help. They help the Native people today. Take those laws away, and there will be no peace and order in society. If you create ghettos like these tribal homelands where special laws will apply and there will be no common rights for all people regardless of race, you will not have a country, you will not have peace, or you will not have order. And you'll have racial animosity like we've never seen before. And this fact, more than anything else, demonstrates the total failure of this policy of special status based on race, special status for Quebec, and special status for Jews, and special status for Muslims, and special status for this, and special status for gays, lesbians, etc. Finally, where is the status for the individual based on merit? In the end, the country becomes a disintegrated battleground, basically a chaotic, anarchic war between the special interest groups, and politicians are those who lie best to all of them equally. And so that's why Canada is a failure. And that's why we're fighting to preserve and maintain something that's long overdue in the preservation of individual freedom, the freedom to express religious truth. Without it, no country can exist, and without the truth, no country deserves to exist. No country will exist. There's some encouraging signs on the horizon. This book, written by a Jewish author, Israel Shahak, who lives in Jerusalem, it's called Jewish History, Jewish Religion. And much of our difficulty has arisen, for example, in the Keekstra case, or in Ernst Zundel's case, or in many other cases, including Malcolm Ross's case. The difficulty of criticizing Judaism is that the moment you do it, you're considered a criminal or worse. And this book, written by a Jewish author, a fairly significant Jewish author, published by a reputable left-wing publishing house in London, explains that the only way to fight anti-Semitism is to simultaneously fight Jewish chauvinism. And of course it acknowledges many of the factual allegations made by Malcolm Ross in his book about the Talmud, and it says many Jewish teachings are flagrantly anti-Christian, and it enumerates them, it lists them, and it indicates why there has to be changes made in the outlook of Jews as well as Gentiles so that there can be some kind of rapprochement. Excuse me, with all due deference to Ho. In any event, a very useful book, and one which we got a number of copies of, and I understand you don't have them, Paul, but this is really helpful to people to understand that there is some hope of change from what have been traditional enemies of freedom, and I feel have been quite wrong in their perception either of history or of truth. But there is no reason to despair. There is a real good reason to hope and pray and work, and struggle and fight, as we all have for many, many years, against the injustice of censorship and the power of these unjust human rights commissions, these politically correct institutions. We have seen that Brian Bruce Inc. is not invincible, and neither is the Canadian Jewish Congress, neither is the B'nai B'rith. Too many people think that there's some kind of great evil force that cannot be resisted and cannot be fought. And the result of that is they do not try. The result of that is that evil triumphs because good people do nothing, as Edmund Burke once said. And we therefore, as individuals, small as we may be, must do everything in our power to overcome the feeling of despair and to overcome the feeling that we are impotent against evil. We have power by virtue of doing what is right. It is better, as it has been said, to light a little candle than curse the darkness. And I think that I'm proud to be able to have helped Malcolm, who has stood in a very darkened environment at times, and often alone. But he's lit a candle, and the light from that candle has shone throughout all of Christian Canada. And it has been known that he has stood for these things. And we have helped him, and I hope to continue to help him. And with the grace of God and the hopeful reason that we might provide to the judges of the Supreme Court, his victory will be the victory for all of us, and for freedom and for truth. That is the struggle that we will start on Tuesday. The struggle that will be resolved on Monday will have a very significant effect on that struggle. Because the power in Canada today is really an evil power. It's a tough thing to say. But Canada was neither created by God, nor is it ruled today by anything that is good. It is ruled by political expediency and motivated by corruption and bribery. That's a sad truth, but it is obviously true. Anyone who has examined the history of Brian Mulroney's government knows it is true. Anybody who's aware of the present government knows it is true. And therefore, when we struggle in a world full of darkness and hate and evil for the truth and for the light, we are doing what is required of us. For God does not ask us to do anything that He does not give us the means to do. He does not promise us a worldly victory, but He promises that we who have tried to serve Him will be rewarded with His grace in the end. And that's really the hope of Christians. And that's the thing that prevented them being defeated and downhearted as they have been persecuted throughout history, as really they are persecuted today. Their jobs have been threatened, their lives have been threatened, but they have never surrendered. And the truth has that power. So come what may, we hope you'll be with us on Tuesday. We hope you'll pray for us on Tuesday. We hope your presence will make it known that you stand with us on Tuesday. But whatever becomes of us, we know that by doing what we will have done, the world will be better for our efforts, and the truth will have a better chance to survive. Thank you very much.